Hey, it's another episode of Necessary Roughness, a bite-sized episode of Necessary Roughness on Bite-Sized Sports Network. Kev will join me today to do a quick preview of Championship Sunday, one of the better Sundays of the calendar year. But before we jump into all the nitty-gritty, Kev, how you doing? Been a while since we've been on stream together, man.
It has. It's been a while. Thanks for having me, John. We need to do this again soon. Maybe have you stop by on an episode of Dweeb. I think we may have a couple of Han Shot first episodes that might be right up your alley. We'll talk later. But I'm having a great week. A little sad, though, the last weekend of football for a lot of us. Obviously, we still have our Super Bowl. The peak was last week, right? 5 straight days of games, one game at a time. And, unless you're a Notre Dame fan like me, it ended pretty well. But we've got 2 more pretty good games. Admittedly, John, not the games I wanted this weekend, but we'll take them, right?
Yeah, we'll take them where we can get them. I mean, I think on one side you've kind of got the zenith of all modern day matchups in Bills Chiefs, which is cool. And then on the other side, at least it's like a divisional kind of situation. You've got the Cinderella story over there, so some intrigue on both sides for sure. But you know what? Let's start with Washington Philly here. I've got some relatively pertinent stats that I will throw out as we kind of get into it. But before I do that, Kev, what's kind of your general feeling around this game right now? Did you feel like it'll be a tight one, or is this one where you're like, well, the die's cast and Philly's gonna get past them some way or another? Do you feel like it's gonna be real close, or do you think they're covering that spread?
I do think it's going to be a bit of a close game. We've got a few factors that go into that. It's a division rival, so it's the third time that they're playing. They should, at this point, know each other pretty well. And while I do expect the Eagles offense, mainly Saquon, to just do whatever he wants, I also expect Daniels to keep the Commanders in the game. He's kind of shown that week after week, even as a rookie quarterback. You kind of keep expecting, like, when's going to be the implosion? When's going to be that game where it's like, oh, yeah, he is a rookie, right? And he continues to answer the call. I don't know if the Commanders defensively will be able to keep the Eagles in check, but the Jalen Hurts potential knee injury, whatever's going on with his leg after last week, if he's not the same guy that he normally is, they can become a bit of a one-dimensional offense. We were able to see, for instance, the safety that he took when he's not able to get out of the pocket to extend plays. That's going to at least give some opportunity for the Commanders. So I think they're going to do enough to keep it close, but ultimately, John, I feel like this is the Eagles' game to lose.
It's 100% their game to lose. I think that's a really good way to put it, just because, they have the superior roster. They have the home field advantage. They have the experience on their side. But it is a divisional rubber match, which, is kind of one of those nebulous things where you can't necessarily explain exactly why, but these teams just always play it tight. The Bears took a 14-win Vikings team to overtime and then beat a playoff Packers team at the end of the year. Just stuff like that. Division games are always just a little goofy, and I think this one could be that way, especially if Jalen Hurts is limited at all, particularly as a runner. Last week they threw for 65 net yards, if you include the sack yardage he took. 65 yards through the air, and they won. It wasn't necessarily the most convincing win, but they were in control throughout, and were able to slam the door at the end. So, how much of this rides on Jalen Hurts' arm? It might not be that much, And that also might be, I mean, of course, it's less dangerous to run the ball than it is to throw it in general. But that might be the only way that Washington is able to turn the tides from a defensive perspective, is if, by some miraculous performance from that defensive line or something like that, they're able to get Philly into, second and longs, third and longs, because they're going to have to really break some of their own tendencies if they want to contain this rushing game. Washington runs base defense, so seven in the box, 4 down, 3 linebackers, some combination, 3-4, 4-3. Base defense just 6% of the time. That's the second lowest, only to Buffalo, who we'll get to as well later on in a similar capacity when you're weighing these things. And they're going to have to load it up, especially if Hurts is going to be limited. I think you live and die by the sword of a Devontae Smith slot fade, or an AJ Brown one-on-one with a Marshawn Lattimore, who's probably coming into this game with a lot to prove after kind of getting handled by Mike Evans throughout that matchup. And another big one coming up. But if you get the ball in the air and you're able to allow Jonathan Allen, by the way, tore his pec in like week 4 or week 6, torn pec, and he came back in week 16 and had one of his best games in a couple of years in week 17. So, you're going to need a big-time performance from guys like that. Daron Payne, you've got such a high investment along this defensive line. You're going to need to allow those guys to pin their ears back. Maybe Bobby Wagner gets a couple first down TFLs, or Frankie Louvu mucks it up and is able to kind of snuff out anything they try to stretch outside. If you're able to get them into those situations, this Washington secondary is really no joke right now. When you see what Mikey Sainristil was able to do in that Lions matchup, had some great reps. I think if you see another strong performance from Marshawn Lattimore, you're going to feel pretty good about your chances if Philly does have to throw the ball. But on the other side is where I think it's most interesting, and it's also where we have the most data, because that last Washington-Philly matchup, remember Jalen Hurts went down early, and it was the Kenny Pickett show. And that didn't go particularly well for Philly. After halftime, they were up by 7 at halftime, 21-14, I think, at halftime. And Philly was only able to get field goals from there on out, 36-33. I think Washington came through and beat them. And so a lot of the data we have is, fully healthy and reflective of what we're going to see this weekend, is that Washington offense versus the Philly defense. Now, the key swinging factor for this game that does change that data is the injury to Sam Cosmi for Washington, who will be out right guard. If you guys don't know about him, if there was a third team All-Pro like the NBA has, he'd probably be in that conversation at right guard. He's been nails all season, and across the A and B gaps is going to be Jalen Carter. And that could really nullify any of the statistics and nerdy shit that I'm about to kind of spell out on that side of the ball. But especially if Jalen Hurts is hampered for this game, I think Washington has the best quarterback. They might be the only best position. They might be the only position group they have an advantage in. But it's such a high leverage position that if that guy gets hot, and the way he's able to manage pressure and avoid pressure and overcome pressure, then things could get kind of interesting. And the heater Jaden Daniels been on. Kev, what is your take been kind of on the ascension of Jaden Daniels, really kind of through that back half of the season and the playoff run? And, how slight of a chance do you think he gives them in this game if he does get hot?
It's been very impressive. You know, I alluded to it a little bit earlier where I said you kind of expect there to be some sort of massive drop off, right? You're thinking conventional wisdom says this is a rookie quarterback. The deeper you go into the playoffs, the tougher this is going to get. And at what point is the moment going to get too big for him? Because you've seen it happen to rookies and vets alike, you know, where it sometimes it happens, but it hasn't happened yet. And for me, it's been the poise because, as you mentioned, just in this matchup, right, the Eagles may have the positional advantage everywhere. And I don't think that this is the only matchup the Commanders have gone into where that has been the case. I think they're a solid team, but I I wasn't someone who had them winning this many games, right? How many people had them here in this moment? And the only reason that they are here, in my opinion, is because of Jaden and the way that he's played. And you know, if unless you're a real sicko, a real stat head, like the casual just red zone watcher, your basic fantasy football player, how many wide receivers in Washington can you name? You know what I mean? Like there's not it's not like you can sit here and say he's coming out here, he's got all these weapons, he's got all these tools, and all he's got to do is don't crash the car, kid. He is making a lot of plays. I think Ertz maybe has been the best receiver. You know, I mean, I know he was a monster in fantasy this year, but so it's not that he doesn't use his rookie safety blanket, but I do think he gives them an outside chance. Now, the little bit of this is foreshadowing to the upcoming program and another damn fantasy podcast. Those guys, they always have to build a narrative, right? For daily fantasy. If you're trying to do those lineups, you got to kind of, how is this game going to play out? And the way that we have discussed it, if in fact Jalen Hurts is not 100% and we get to a situation, Saquon's going to get his, you know, the Rams were very happy at containing him to 100-something yards because he only busted him for 170-yard touchdown in the first half. And they were happy with that, right? They're like, well, yeah, that's what's going to happen. He's going to have that one big play, maybe one per half. Yeah. You're going to have those. If you can bottle everything else up and stay within striking distance, if this team is within 10 points in the final 6 minutes and Jaden has the ball, I think Washington has a chance because it only takes one stop. It only takes one bad decision by Philly with their time management in those final 4 minutes. That gives, maybe you get that extra possession with 2 minutes that you might not have expected. So if they're able to hang around, I do think he gives them a chance. I can't at this rate. If I'll be surprised if the fall off happens. From what I've seen so far, I can't imagine that Jaden won't live up to the moment. And if they're in it, he gives them a fighting chance. However slim, I wouldn't be putting my money on it. But if it comes down to it, he will give me hope that we will get who am I kidding? A Commanders Bills Super Bowl. We're never getting that, fans, but one can dream. Could you imagine two of the most needy franchises for a Super Bowl? We all win. We all just get to sit back and say, if we're not a Bills or a Commanders fan, yes, we all get the win. No, instead, we're going to get the Chiefs, aren't we? Yep. Anywho, we're not talking about that game yet.
The Bills haven't made the Super Bowl since the year before the last time the Commanders made the NFC Championship. So you've got twin droughts almost between the two fan bases that Washington just broke last weekend, and the Bills have a chance to break this weekend. But you're right. It's something. It's something it's tough to put your money on. But I would not be flabbergasted if Washington pulls this out. And I think you've got to consider, a defensive coordinator like Vic Fangio for Philly going up against a rookie quarterback. And as much as it's just this game, it's who's on the field, it's you're watching the tape, and the tape doesn't lie. There's still going to be a little bit of that in the back of his head. Hey, this guy's a rookie. He's not going to be able to adjust to this, that whole thing. And I think he could slip up that way. The thing about Fangio is he's very dogmatic with his scheme, the way he installs it, and the way he employs it. It's very vanilla pre-snap. you could there are Madden players out there who could sit in the backfield on a Sunday and have a pretty decent idea about what coverage Philly's going to end up in post snap based on the look they're getting. And that can be, frustrating when you're still not able to beat it. And all of the communication they do post snap and the way they pass things off from zone to zone is very, very sharp. And this is the thing about a Fangio defense. They're at their best at the end of the season. It took a few weeks for him to realize that Cooper DeJean should be in the slot starting over Avonte Maddox. They got that there. You've got two rookie DBs who are kind of had to get their feet wet a little bit and figure things out, and now they're really humming. And then you've got some vets and some longer tenured players that are going to understand that. But with Philly, with Washington offense against the Philly defense, I think it's going to come down to whether or not Washington is able to actually threaten with the run game. And a lot of that is going to have to do with Jaden. With those zone reads, particularly on 3rd and 4th and shorts. He's so effective there, but between Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler and Jaden, even without Sam Cosmi, they're going to have to find a way to establish the run and get into advantageous downs and distances on 2nd and 3rd. And hopefully they're able to force one of those safeties down into the box and punish them deep. Because Philly is also they're not in base particularly often either, about a 14.5%, little more middle of the pack, not as infrequently as Washington, but they don't like to be in base if they can help it. And if Washington does like one of those pony formations with the two backs, or they do deploy two tight ends, try to force Philly into base. If they're able to do so by establishing the run, then all of a sudden you could punish those guys deep. And the reason you want to get them out of these too high structures is because they're so fucking good when they're in them. Philly runs quarters at the highest rate in the NFL, about 20% of the time. They're also first in EPA per play when running quarters. It's 0.274 EPA per play out of quarters. And they also are first in cover 6 rate, which is essentially quarters to half of the field and cover 2 to the other half of the field, quarter, half. A lot of folks call that, and they're 6th in EPA per play when they are in cover 6. And these are staple Fangio coverages, particularly on passing downs, but they will sit in them early as well. And if you're able to pluck one of those safeties down into the box, if you're able to force their hand that way, then maybe you do see Jaden put a ball in a fucking shoebox to De'Ami Brown on a bang 8 or a deep crosser. Like that one throw he had in Detroit to De'Ami Brown on the deep crosser. He put that in a shoe. He put it in like a size 5 women's shoebox. Like you ever try to put like a real basketball through a little Tykes hoop, and the circumference is like exactly the same, so you could maybe dunk it, but you can't really shoot it. That was this throw to De'Ami Brown, and by the time it arrives to De'Ami Brown, I think it was Terrion Arnold literally has his hand over Brown's eyes, and the ball just falls right into his breadbasket. It was one of the greatest throws I've ever seen, and that deep accuracy from Jaden to a guy like Terry McLaurin, to a guy like De'Ami Brown, who was one of the best deep threats in college when he was catching passes from Sam Howell at North Carolina. And then we didn't really hear about him until he got himself a real NFL quarterback, kind of like Terry McLaurin. You kind of forgot how badass Terry McLaurin is until you get Jaden Daniels pulling the trigger for him. So if Washington can threaten with the run game, threaten with the screen game, if Cliff Kingsbury can keep doing the things he's done to put them and keep them in advantageous positions, I think Washington has a shot. But I've got to pick Philly. I picked Philly preseason to make the Super Bowl, so I'm going to roll with it. There have been I think the count is like 14 total 60-plus yard rushes over the course of the season. I think Saquon has 5 of them, which is insane. And that Philly O-line, and we all know about that. I've got to go Philly. Real quick, let's talk Buffalo KC. It's a little bit, higher. It's a little bit more of appointment viewing for the casual fan. Even non-casuals are probably more excited about this game than they are about Philly and Washington, and rightfully so. And this is a stat. I saw a tweet. I want to say it was EJ Snyder from Bootleg Football, but I spent too much time on the app. It could have been anybody. I think that was. It was somebody I respect. Anyway, the stat was this. Over the last 10 matchups between Buffalo and KC, regular and postseason, Josh Allen Mahomes era, they are 5-5. Dead even. They've split the last 10 games. Over those 10 games, Buffalo has scored 251 points. Over those same 10 games, Kansas City has scored 251 points.
Wow.
Consequentially, they've both allowed 251 points over those 10 games. We have a dead even point differential over the last 10 meetings between these two teams, and now we get and that can't stay the same after the 11th. So that's exciting. I think when you really try to boil this one down, it's less about a quarterback duel than it has been in the past, I think, because since the kind of breakout, the 3-year sort of breakout party of Mahomes when it was high flying and Tyreek Hill and 30 points a game, they've sort of had to adjust to that. Decided not to pay Tyreek Hill. Haven't really had a ton of luck replenishing that receiver. But what they have done is assembled one of the best interior trios of offensive linemen we've seen in a long time. Joe Tooney will be at left tackle again, it looks like. So Allegretti, I think, is going to be left guard. So that's a little bit different, but that's a weakness of Buffalo is the defensive interior and the run defense. And I think KC is going to try to pluck at that and try to limit possessions. But Buffalo is going to do the same thing. Buffalo, with Josh Allen and everything, they move on from Stephon Diggs. It's like, okay, well, how are they going to have a functional offense without this number one receiver? And the run game's been inconsistent. Now the run game is one of the strongest facets of this team. A large part of that is Josh Allen, but James Cook as well, Ty Johnson, Ray Davis have all gotten a lot of open running lanes and all been really effective in the passing game. And this team runs a 6th offensive lineman at the highest rate in the NFL. Two teams with the 2 best quarterbacks in the NFL, for my money, aren't as reliant on the 2 of them as you'd think they might be. They are relying on the 2 of them to take care of the ball and make conscientious decisions with it and keep things on schedule and make the plays when they need to. But the nuts and bolts of both of these teams are built through the trenches on the offensive side, 2 badass offensive lines, 2 strong run games, and 2 quarterbacks who aren't going to make many mistakes in high leverage situations. Josh Allen took 14 sacks in 17 games. It's unbelievable. Mahomes did have some mistakes this season for sure. But you're going to see Sean McDermott, defensive mind, against Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. You're going to see Steve Spagnuolo, potentially the best single game planner of all time. Potentially. One of them. 2011 Super Bowl against the Pats. NASCAR front, Justin Tuck, Ozzie Manura, all that shit. All of the runs he's been on with KC. You're going to see that against Josh Allen. And I think that's going to be really interesting. I think the defensive schemes against these offenses will be really interesting. And I don't think we're going to see a high-scoring game necessarily. It's tough to predict something like that. What's interesting about the Spagnuolo thing, though, is actually throughout this season, Kansas City is 29th in defensive third down conversion rate allowed. And the Bills are pretty low on that list as well, if I'm not mistaken. So I think you're going to see a lot of crazy curveballs from both DCs. I think you're going to see plays being made when they need to be made by both quarterbacks. But ultimately, I have a really hard time picking against KC, but I'm going to do it. I'm going Bills.
Oh,
I think they're going to be just they're one of few teams that's done anything to put a roof on Travis Kelce this season. 2 catches for 8 yards for Travis Kelce in their first matchup, and he had 93 on the season catches. So I think they can do just enough on that side of the ball. And I think you're going to see a lot of just fuck you energy from Josh Allen in the moments he needs to bring that energy. And I think he'll take care of the ball throughout the rest of the game. Who are you picking? Bills, Chiefs.
well, I will keep mine short and sweet because I know we got ADP on deck, guys. Don't go anywhere if you want to build some fantasy lineups for these matchups. We got you covered. Mine has nothing to do with X's and O's. I think everything John said is accurate, and I do think this is going to be a tight, low-scoring game. And allow me to be the curmudgeon to put on my conspiracy theory tinfoil cap. But I believe it's going to come down to officiating. The Chiefs are going to win because the NFL wants them to win. They want the three-peat. They want more Taylor Swift on your television, especially on a Super Bowl. I will say it. I know we don't like to hear it. I know we don't like to acknowledge it. I don't think there's a quarterback on this earth that has had more interceptions overturned by penalties in the last 3 years than Patrick Mahomes. It's astounding how many have been called back due to penalty. They have tackles getting away with false starts 5 to 6 times a game on primetime television. We can all see it, and therefore I would never put any money against the Chiefs, although I'm rooting for John to be right, and I'm hoping I'm just a crazy asshole. But I think the Chiefs win in a close, albeit controversial game.
Yeah, I mean, that's not difficult to picture. And I think, for what it's worth, like that stuff tends to balance out, and you look at all the numbers, and really over the course of the Mahomes era, they're pretty middle of the pack in penalty yardage and stuff like that. But I think the thing about it is the spotlight's on when those things take place. I think you see a few more of them in maybe high leverage situations, but I don't know. Some of that's really just the human perception of things, like just the things that stick out to you. I think are those things are more difficult to forget than a second quarter screw job that was in favor of the Chiefs' opponent. You know what I mean? Like it does come down
Confirmation
to that.
bias, right? You're only keeping score
For
when
sure.
the things that back your theory happen. You're not keeping score when
Yes.
the things that disprove your theory happen. I feel that.
Yeah, I turn the Chiefs on to confirm priors and nothing else. But the thing about these Chiefs, and this will be the last thing I say before we kick it over to the ADP fellas, but I think we sometimes, as a football viewing collective, have a hard time zooming out and appreciating things as they're happening. I think there were a lot of people that didn't appreciate the greatness, the sustained greatness we saw from the Patriots, that we saw from the 90s Cowboys and the 80s to 90s 49ers. And I think if we see a three-peat from Kansas City in our lifetimes, it'll be the first one ever. And that would be astounding, particularly considering that among Chiefs fans and national pundits, this is one of the weakest Chiefs teams we've seen since Patrick Mahomes entered the building. And they're 15-1, and everyone's afraid to pick against them. That's hilarious. And the level that they've reached to where they've kind of set their own standard for themselves, I think is something to behold. And I hope they lose. All right. Let's kick it over to ADP real quick. You can catch Kev on Wednesday nights on the Dweeb channel, other nights on the Dweeb channel. There's Hanshot First over there, Weekly Dweeb, all that stuff with our good buddy James. You can also catch me here generally on Tuesdays, maybe a random pop-up show like this here and there. And also follow my written work over on zonecoverage.com right here, covering the Vikings. We're doing a lot of free agency prognosticating this time of year. So check that out if you have any interest in any of that. And without further ado, let's kick it to Trev and Josh over on ADP. Stick around and see what those guys have to say. Build your lineup out with the bite-sized team. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and stick around for ADP. We will see you next week.